Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm a 24-year-old college student working part-time at a coffee shop downtown. Money's always tight, and I've been living in this tiny 400 square foot studio apartment for the past 2 years. It's not much, but it's mine, and I've worked really hard to keep it. The rent takes up most of my paycheck, but I love having my own space after years of terrible roommate situations. My best friend from high school introduced me to this girl about 6 months ago. Let's call her Karen because, well, you'll see why. Karen is also in college but comes from a wealthy family. She's the type who always has the newest phone, fancy clothes, and never seems to worry about money. We've only hung out twice, once at a group dinner and once at a house party. We're not close friends by any stretch. We follow each other on social media and occasionally like each other's posts, but that's about it. So imagine my surprise when I got a text from her on a Tuesday evening while I was studying for midterms. I was already stressed about my upcoming exams and had just finished a long shift at work. She texted me saying she had a huge favor to ask. I figured maybe she needed notes from a class we both took or something simple like that. I told her sure and asked what was up. Then she asked if she could borrow my apartment for the weekend, saying it would be such a lifesaver. I stared at my phone for a solid minute. Borrow my apartment? I thought maybe she meant she needed a place to crash for a night. Maybe she had a fight with her roommate or something. I asked her what she meant exactly and if she needed somewhere to stay. She explained that she and her boyfriend wanted to have a cute little staycation that weekend, and her dorm room was too small. She said my place would be perfect for them. She wanted me to leave my own apartment so she and her boyfriend could have a romantic weekend in my home. I asked her to clarify if she really wanted me to leave my apartment so they could stay there alone. She confirmed that yes, she wanted me gone just for the weekend, Friday night through Sunday. She said they really wanted some alone time away from campus. I was honestly speechless. The audacity was incredible. This girl, who I barely knew, was asking me to vacate my own home so she could play house with her boyfriend. I told her that I lived there, that this was my home and not a hotel, and that I couldn't just leave for the weekend. She told me not to be difficult and suggested I could stay with friends or something because she really needed this. The entitlement in that message made my blood boil. Don't be difficult. This was my apartment that I worked my butt off to afford. I explained that I wasn't being difficult, but saying no because this was where I lived. I told her I had studying to do and work, and I wasn't leaving my home for her staycation. She asked if I was seriously unable to do this one little favor for her. Little favor? I started typing several angry responses but deleted them all. I took a deep breath and tried to be reasonable. I explained to her that asking someone to leave their home for the weekend wasn't a little favor, but actually a pretty huge request. I apologized but said it wasn't something I could do. She told me that I had just ruined her weekend. I sat there staring at that message. No apology, no acknowledgement of how insane her request was. No thanks for even considering it. Just pure blame directed at me for ruining her weekend by not abandoning my own home. I pointed out that I didn't ruin anything and that she had made plans assuming I'd give up my apartment without even asking me first. She just said whatever, and that she thought we were friends. That was the last message she sent. No response when I pointed out that friends don't typically expect each other to vacate their homes for romantic getaways. I screenshot the conversation and sent it to my best friend who introduced us. She was mortified and couldn't stop apologizing. Apparently, Karen had asked her for my number specifically to ask this favor, but my friend assumed it was for something normal like borrowing class notes. My friend kept saying how sorry she was and that she had no idea Karen was going to ask something so ridiculous. She said it was completely insane. I asked if Karen had told her what she wanted my number for. My friend said Karen had just mentioned wanting to ask me a favor, and she never imagined it would be this. She promised never to give Karen anyone's contact info again. My friend decided to do some digging and found out that Karen had asked 3 other people for their apartments that same week. 3. She was apparently going down a list of acquaintances trying to find someone willing to give up their home for her little romantic weekend. About a week later, I was at the campus coffee shop when I overheard Karen talking loudly to her friends about how selfish people are and how no one wants to help each other anymore. She was clearly talking about the apartment situation without mentioning specifics. She complained about asking for one tiny favor and how someone acted like she was asking for their kidney or something. Her friend asked what she had requested. Karen explained that she just wanted to use someone's place for the weekend, saying it wasn't like they were using it anyway. Not like I was using it. I live there. That's literally using it. I decided to have a little fun. I walked over to their table with my coffee and greeted Karen, asking how her weekend had been. She looked uncomfortable but tried to play it cool, saying it was fine. I asked if she had ended up finding a place for her staycation. Her friends looked confused, so I elaborated by explaining that Karen had asked to borrow my apartment for the weekend and wanted me to leave so she and her boyfriend could have alone time in my studio. Her friends looked shocked. One of them actually asked what was happening out loud. Karen said it wasn't that big of a deal. I agreed that she was right, that asking someone to vacate their own home for a date night was totally reasonable. I told her that next time I'd just offer her the laundry room in my building since it was pretty cozy if you curled up next to the dryer. I walked away before she could respond, but I heard one of her friends telling Karen that what she'd done was actually crazy as I left. 2 weeks later, my friend texted me that Karen had asked another mutual acquaintance if she could borrow her car for a week for some errands. When the girl asked what kind of errands required her car for an entire week, Karen admitted she wanted to take a road trip but didn't want to put miles on her own car. Some people really live in their own world where everyone else exists to make their lives more convenient. She thought asking for my apartment was a reasonable request, and she had the nerve to blame me for ruining her weekend when I said no. The girl has since been quietly removed from most of our mutual friend group chat. When you're used to getting everything handed to you, the word no becomes personally offensive. I'm part of the creative team at the company I work at, so I spend a lot of time sketching out ideas, taking notes during brainstorming sessions, and marking up drafts. Having good pens is actually important for my job, not just some weird quirk. I'm particular about my writing tools. I know that sounds silly, but when you're constantly jotting down ideas and need to write fast, having pens that flow smoothly makes a real difference. I'd invested in a small collection of gel pens. Nothing fancy or expensive, just some reliable ones in different colors that I actually enjoyed using. My favorite was this purple gel pen that wrote like butter and never skipped. The problem started about 2 months ago. I come to my desk in the morning and my purple pen would be gone. Then my black gel pen disappeared. Then my blue one. At first I figured I was just being absent-minded, maybe leaving them in conference rooms or something, but it kept happening. And only to my good pens. The cheap office-supplied ballpoints stayed put. I work in an open office layout so anyone could walk by my desk when I wasn't there, but I started paying attention to who was around my area and I had my suspicions. There's this woman who sits 2 rows over. Let's call her Karen because, well, you'll see why. She's one of those people who acts super friendly but has this underlying entitled attitude about everything. She's always taking things from the kitchen without asking, taking credit for other people's ideas in meetings, that sort of thing. I noticed Karen would often walk past my desk when I was at lunch or in the bathroom, and she had this habit of just taking things she needed without asking anyone. Paper clips, staplers, highlighters. She treated the entire office like her personal supply closet, but I didn't want to be that person who accuses someone without proof. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I really was just losing my pen somehow, so I kept quiet and kept buying new ones, getting more frustrated each time one disappeared. Then came the meeting that changed everything. We were having our weekly team review, and I was sitting across from Karen at the conference table. About halfway through, I looked down and saw her writing notes with a very familiar purple gel pen. My purple gel pen. The one with a tiny scratch on the clip that I'd recognize anywhere. My heart started pounding, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe there was some explanation. I politely told her that I thought she was using my pen. She looked up with this innocent expression like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth and asked what pen I was talking about. I explained that the purple one she was using was mine and that it had gone missing from my desk yesterday. She laughed, actually laughed, like I told her a funny joke. She said she must have picked it up somewhere and that she didn't even notice. That was it. No apology. No offer to give it back. She just kept using it like nothing happened. And when the meeting ended, she walked out with my pen still in her hand. I was furious, but I also knew that making a big scene would just make me look petty. Who argues over a $3 pen, right? But it wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. She was stealing from me and she clearly didn't care that she'd been caught. That's when I decided to get creative. I went online and ordered a pack of refillable pens that looked almost identical to my missing ones. But here's the twist, I also ordered some glitter gel ink refills, the kind that writes normally but dries with this super sparkly, obvious glitter effect. It looks fine when you're writing, but once it dries on the paper, it's like someone dumped craft store glitter all over your notes. I spent my lunch break carefully swapping out the regular ink for the glitter gel in 3 different pens: purple, black, and blue. Then I left them on my desk in plain sight, just like always. Sure enough, the next morning my purple pen was gone. I had to bite my lip to keep from grinning. The following day was our monthly client presentation meeting. All the department heads were there, plus some important clients. Everyone was taking notes, looking professional and serious. I kept looking at Karen, who was writing away with my booby-trapped pen, completely oblivious. About 20 minutes into the meeting, one of the account managers sitting next to Karen looked down at her notebook and did a double take. He asked her why her notebook looked like a birthday card. The whole table went quiet. Karen looked down at her notes, and I watched her face go through about 5 different emotions in 2 seconds. Her professional meeting notes were covered in purple glitter that sparkled under the conference room lights. Every single line she'd written looked like it belonged in a kindergarten art project. Karen stammered, clearly confused about what had happened and how her pen had betrayed her. She stared at the pen in her hand like it had personally wronged her. The silence stretched on forever while everyone tried not to laugh. Even the clients were trying to hide their smirks. Our department head cleared his throat and suggested we take a short break. Karen practically ran out of the room clutching her sparkly notebook. She never said anything to me about it. No confrontation, no angry accusations, nothing. But here's the beautiful part. My pen stopped disappearing. Completely. It's been 3 weeks now and every single pen I leave on my desk stays exactly where I put it. The funniest part is that she still won't make eye contact with me. Whenever we're in meetings together, she brings her own pens now. Cheap office ballpoints that she clutches like precious gems. I've worked as a mechanic for the past 6 years, and cars have always been my passion. About 3 years ago, I finally saved up enough money to buy my dream car, a 2018 muscle car that I'd been eyeing for months. It wasn't brand new, but it was in great condition, and had everything I wanted. The previous owner had already installed a performance exhaust system that gave it that deep, throaty sound that real car enthusiasts appreciate. When I moved into my current neighborhood 2 years ago, I thought I'd found the perfect place. It's a quiet street with decent neighbors and reasonable rent. Most people here are pretty laid back, and I've never had any major issues with anyone. I work standard hours at the shop, leaving around 7 in the morning and coming home around 6 in the evening. I'm not the type to rev my engine unnecessarily or cause problems. I just drive normally and mind my own business. That all changed about 6 months ago when a new guy moved in next door. From day one, this guy had an attitude problem. He's probably in his 50s, always wearing pressed khakis and polo shirts like he's trying to prove something. The first week he was there, he came over to introduce himself, but it was clear he was really just scoping out the neighborhood. He told me he was my new neighbor and made it clear that he valued peace and quiet around here. I politely introduced myself and mentioned that I was pretty quiet myself. He responded by saying he worked from home and couldn't have any disruptions. I thought that was a weird way to introduce yourself, but I figured he was just being upfront about his preferences. I had no idea what was coming. The complaint started about 2 weeks later. He knocked on my door one evening looking all worked up. He said we needed to talk about my car, specifically about how my exhaust was way too loud and was disturbing his work calls and his peace of mind. I explained that I left for work at 7 and came home at 6, so I didn't think I was being unreasonable with my schedule. He then claimed that the noise ordinance in this city was 55 decibels during the day and that my car was definitely louder than that. I corrected him, explaining that I had actually checked when I bought the car and it was well within legal limits. The ordinance actually allowed up to 70 decibels during daytime hours. When he insisted that couldn't be right, I offered to show him the documentation. He walked off without another word. Over the next few months, he kept coming back with the same complaint. Every few weeks, he'd knock on my door or corner me in the driveway with some new demand. He would insist that I needed to replace my exhaust with a stock one, and I would tell him it wasn't happening because the car was legal and I wasn't doing anything wrong. He would then claim I was being inconsiderate to the whole neighborhood. When I asked if any other neighbors had complained, he admitted they hadn't but suggested they were probably just being polite. I told him I had talked to several neighbors and none of them had an issue with my car. This pattern went on for months. He'd complain, I'd explain that everything was legal and reasonable, and he'd get frustrated and leave. I started avoiding him when I could, but he always seemed to find ways to bring it up. About 3 weeks ago, things escalated when he started leaving notes on my windshield. The first one said my exhaust was ruining the neighborhood and demanded I replace it or face what would happen next. Another called it my final warning about noise pollution. The last one threatened that legal action would be taken if I didn't comply. I kept all the notes, thinking they might be useful if things got worse. I had no idea how much worse they were about to get. Last Tuesday, I was running late for work because I'd stayed up late helping my buddy rebuild his transmission. I rushed out to my car around 7:15, threw my lunch in the passenger seat and started backing out of the driveway. That's when I noticed something felt wrong with the brake pedal. It was going almost to the floor before I felt any resistance. I immediately pulled back into my driveway and popped the hood. I've been working on cars long enough to recognize when something's been tampered with. Someone had loosened the brake line fittings. Not enough to cause an immediate failure, but enough that the brake fluid would slowly leak out. If I'd driven to work like that, by the time I needed to stop on the highway, I would have had no brakes at all. My hands were shaking when I realized what could have happened. This wasn't just vandalism, this was attempted murder. I called in sick to work and spent the morning fixing the brake lines and checking every other system on the car. Everything else seemed fine, but I was paranoid about what else might have been messed with. I decided to set up a security camera that night, pointing it at my driveway. I had a feeling whoever did this might try again. I positioned it so it had a clear view of my car but wasn't obvious from the street. 3 nights later, around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the camera. I looked at the live feed and saw something unbelievable. My neighbor was crouched next to my car with a toolbox, working on something underneath the vehicle. I grabbed my phone to record and quietly went outside through my back door, coming around the side of the house so I could get a clear view. I started recording and asked him what he was doing to my car. He jumped up so fast he hit his head on the undercarriage. When he saw me recording, his face went from surprised to absolutely furious. He yelled that I couldn't record him on his own property, but I pointed out that he was actually on my property messing with my car. When I asked what he had done to it, he claimed he was just checking something. I called him out on the obvious lie, asking why he would be checking something with a wrench set at 2 in the morning. When I specifically asked what he had done to my brakes this time, mentioning that I had already fixed them once this week, he denied knowing what I was talking about. That's when he completely lost it. He started screaming about how I was ruining his life and how he couldn't concentrate on his work. He was waving the wrench around wildly and I could see he was beyond rational thought. He shouted that I was going to get rid of that car one way or another. When I asked him directly if he had messed with my brakes to try to kill me, he said that maybe if I got hurt, I would finally understand how serious this was. He had just admitted to attempted murder on camera. But then things got even worse when he raised the wrench over his head and came at me. He demanded I give him my phone, clearly wanting to destroy the evidence. I've been lifting weights since high school, and I'm a lot younger than this guy. When he swung the wrench at me, I easily stepped back and avoided it. He was so off balance from the swing that he stumbled and fell forward onto the driveway. I told him to stay down while I called the police. Even while lying on the ground, he insisted I couldn't prove anything. I reminded him that I had him on camera admitting he sabotaged my car to hurt me, and I also had him on camera trying to assault me with a weapon. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. I showed them the recording, and they immediately arrested my neighbor. The officers were shocked by what they saw on the video. One of them asked if he had made threats before, and I explained that he had been harassing me for months about my exhaust, but I never thought he would try to kill me over it. The officer told me I would need to come to the station the next day to file a formal complaint and provide a copy of the recording. They took him away in handcuffs while he was still screaming about how I was the real problem in the neighborhood. The next day I went to the police station and pressed charges for attempted murder, vandalism, and assault with a deadly weapon. I also provided copies of all the threatening notes he'd left on my car. The detective handling the case said they'd found evidence of brake fluid tampering on his tools, which backed up my story. 2 weeks later, I found out he'd been charged with multiple felonies. His lawyer tried to get him a plea deal, but the prosecutor said the video evidence was too clear and the charges too serious. He's looking at several years in prison if convicted. His house went up for sale last week. Apparently, he can't make his mortgage payments while sitting in jail waiting for trial. The whole neighborhood is relieved he's gone. Turns out I wasn't the only one he'd been harassing. He'd been leaving complaints with the Homeowners Association about everyone's violations, people's lawn height, Christmas decorations, even someone's welcome mat being the wrong color. I still drive my car with the same exhaust system. It's legal, it sounds great, and now I don't have to worry about some lunatic trying to murder me over it. I'm a 39-year-old guy who works in tech up in Seattle. My wife and I have 2 kids, ages 11 and 9, and we try to stay pretty active. We hike, bike, walk everywhere we can. It's just how we were raised. My sister lives back in Dallas where we grew up. She married this guy, and they have a 12-year-old son together. My sister and I were both born in China, but our parents brought us to America when we were little kids. Our parents always pushed us to eat healthy and stay moving. My sister stuck with that lifestyle, but her husband is the kind of American who thinks driving 3 blocks to get the mail is normal. This guy grew up thinking fruit snacks counted as actual fruit. He drives his huge car everywhere, even to places that are literally across the street. He's not completely out of shape, but he definitely can't handle much physical activity. My sister has tried to get him more active over the years, but he always finds excuses. Their son just finished 7th grade and had been studying ancient China in school. He was obsessed with the terracotta warriors and kept asking about his Chinese heritage. My sister thought it would be perfect to take him to China to see where half his family came from. I was already planning a trip to Chongqing to visit our extended family, so we decided to combine our trips and make it a big family vacation. I spent months planning this thing. We were going to hit Beijing, Xi'an, Nanjing, and then finish in Chongqing. I researched all the historical sites the kids had learned about in school. I booked tours, found family-friendly hotels, mapped out transportation. The whole time I kept mentioning to my sister that Chinese cities involve a lot of walking. The subway systems are massive, the historical sites are spread out, and cars just aren't practical for most tourist areas. I told my sister during our planning calls that we were going to be doing a ton of walking on this trip. I explained that Chinese cities aren't really built for driving around like Dallas. She said that would be fine and they could handle it. Her husband was always in the background during these calls, and I could tell he wasn't really paying attention. I tried to be more direct and told them that some of these places required walking for miles. I explained that the Forbidden City alone was massive and that a lot of the historical sites had stairs and uneven ground. Her husband just said they'd be fine and asked how hard it could be. I should have pushed harder, but I figured they were adults who could make their own decisions. The trip started out okay. Beijing was manageable because we could take taxis between major sites. But even then, her husband was breathing heavy after climbing the steps at the Temple of Heaven. By the time we got to the Forbidden City, he was already complaining. Her husband started asking why nobody had told him there would be this much walking. I reminded him that I had told him multiple times that Chinese tourism involved a lot of walking. He said he thought I was exaggerating. My sister kept making excuses for him and would stay behind with him while my wife and I took all the kids ahead to keep up with our tour groups. The kids were having an amazing time learning about their heritage, but I could see my sister getting frustrated. Xi'an was worse. The Terracotta Warriors site is huge, and you have to walk between different excavation areas. Her husband made it about halfway through before he started demanding we find somewhere to sit. Her husband complained that the whole thing was ridiculous and asked why they couldn't have golf carts or something. Our tour guide explained that this was an archaeological site and they preserved it as closely as possible to its original state. Her husband said that was stupid and asked what about people who couldn't walk that much. The tour guide just stared at him. My nephew looked embarrassed, and I felt bad for the kid. This was supposed to be his big cultural experience, and his stepdad was acting like a spoiled child. But the real disaster happened in Chongqing. We were visiting my grandmother's old hometown, which is built on the side of a mountain. Everything is stairs and steep slopes. The whole area is basically vertical. I had planned to take the kids to the local market through this beautiful park that our family had helped build decades ago. It was important to me that the kids saw this piece of our family history. Her husband said he wanted to come with us because he was tired of sitting around the hotel. I asked if he was sure because it was going to be a long walk through some pretty steep terrain. I explained that this wasn't like the tourist sites with paved paths. He said he could handle it and told me to stop treating him like an invalid. I said I wasn't treating him like an invalid but was just warning him that it was physically demanding. He dismissed my concerns and said we should just go. We hadn't even made it half a mile before he was completely winded. The humidity was brutal and the path was all uphill. The kids were running ahead, excited to explore, while he was stopping every few minutes to catch his breath. I suggested that he head back since there was a taxi stand right nearby. I told him the kids and I could continue to the market. He refused and said he wasn't going back alone. He demanded that the whole family stay together. I explained that the kids were really excited to see the market and the park because it was part of their cultural education. He said he didn't care about cultural education and only cared about not being abandoned. We argued for another 10 minutes while the kids waited. Finally, I convinced him to take a taxi back to the hotel while we continued on foot. The kids had an incredible time at the market and loved hearing stories about our family's connection to the park. My nephew was fascinated by everything. When we got back to the hotel, her husband was sulking in the room and my sister was furious. My sister asked how I could just leave him behind like that. I explained that he chose to take a taxi back and that I had given him the option to turn around, which he took. She said I should have just taken a taxi to the market in the first place. I explained that would have taken twice as long because of traffic and the kids would have missed seeing the park. I told her this was about them experiencing their heritage. She said I hadn't considered his limitations when I planned the trip. I said that I had warned them dozens of times that this trip would involve a lot of walking. I reminded her that I had told them that Chinese cities weren't car-friendly for tourists. Her husband said I should have been more specific. I asked how I could have been more specific than saying we'd be doing tons of walking in mountainous terrain. The argument went on for an hour. My sister accused me of being inconsiderate and not accommodating her husband's needs. She said I should have planned everything around his fitness level instead of focusing on giving the kids a cultural experience. My sister said I was being selfish and that this was supposed to be a family trip. I told her it was a family trip and that's exactly why I had prioritized the kids, getting to experience their cultural heritage over someone's refusal to prepare for a trip he knew would be physically demanding. Her husband said he didn't know it would be this bad. I reminded him that he didn't listen when I told him multiple times exactly what to expect. The next morning things got even worse. My sister and her husband had been up all night complaining to each other about me. They came to breakfast with a whole list of demands. My sister announced that they had decided that for the rest of the trip, we were only doing activities that her husband could handle. I pointed out that we were leaving the next day and this had been our last day of sightseeing. Her husband said that meant we had wasted the whole trip because I didn't plan properly. I told him I had planned a trip that would give the kids an amazing cultural experience, and his inability to walk reasonable distances wasn't my fault. My sister said I was being really mean about this. I said I was being realistic and reminded her that I had spent months planning this trip and repeatedly warned them about the physical requirements. I pointed out that they had chosen to ignore that information. That's when her husband really lost it. He accused me of planning the whole trip to make him look bad. He said I wanted to show off how much more in shape I was than him. I told him that was completely ridiculous. He asked if it really was and claimed that I had kept pushing these walking tours, even after I saw he was struggling. I explained that I did it because the kids were having the time of their lives, learning about their heritage. I reminded him that my nephew had been talking about the terracotta warriors for months. I asked if I was supposed to deprive him of that experience because his stepdad couldn't handle stairs. Her husband said I should have found alternatives. I told him there were no alternatives because these were historical sites, not theme parks. I explained that they didn't have escalators and golf carts. The argument attracted attention from other hotel guests, and my nephew looked like he wanted to disappear. That's when I really got angry. I told him that his son had had an incredible experience on this trip. I explained that the boy had learned about his Chinese heritage, seen amazing historical sites, and connected with his culture. I said that instead of being proud of that, he was making everything about his own comfort. Her husband told me not to bring his son into this. I said the boy was the whole reason we had planned this trip. I reminded him that this was supposed to be about his son discovering his roots, and he was ruining it with his selfishness. My sister tried to defend her husband, but I could see in her eyes that she knew I was right. Their son had been having an amazing time until his stepdad started throwing tantrums. The final day was tense, but we managed to get through it. On the flight home, my nephew came and sat next to me. My nephew thanked me for taking them on this trip and said it was the best experience of his life. I told him I was glad he enjoyed it. He apologized for his stepdad being difficult and said he knew the man had made things harder for everyone. It broke my heart that a 12-year-old felt like he had to apologize for his stepdad's behavior. A few weeks after we got back, my sister called to continue the argument. My sister said she had been thinking about the trip and still thought I was inconsiderate. I asked her inconsiderate to whom, pointing out that the kids had had an amazing time. She said I had been inconsiderate to her husband. She said I knew he wasn't in great shape, and I had planned activities that excluded him. I told her I had planned activities that were appropriate for the destinations we were visiting. I explained that China was not set up for people who refused to walk more than 3 blocks. She said I could have made accommodations. I asked what accommodations she had in mind. I asked if I should have hired a team of people to carry him around in a sedan chair. She told me not to be sarcastic. I said I wasn't being sarcastic and was genuinely asking what she thought I should have done differently. I asked if we should have skipped the terracotta warriors because there were stairs, avoided the Great Wall because it involved hiking, or canceled the whole cultural education aspect of the trip because walking was required. She didn't have an answer for that. A month later, my nephew called me directly. My nephew called to thank me again for the China trip. He told me he had just written his report about it for school and gotten an A+. He said his teacher told him it was the best cultural heritage project she had ever read. I told him that was fantastic and said I was proud of him. He explained that he had used all the pictures we took and written about the family history I had told him. He said the part about our ancestors helping build that park was his teacher's favorite. I told him I was glad he appreciated that and explained that it was important to me that he understood his family's connection to that place. He told me he knew his stepdad had complained a lot, but he wanted me to know that the trip had changed his life. He said he was thinking about studying Chinese history in college now. That phone call made every argument and every moment of tension worth it. My nephew got exactly what the trip was supposed to give him: a deep connection to his heritage and pride in his cultural background. That mattered more to me than his stepdad's hurt feelings about having to exercise for the first time in decades. Some things are more important than accommodating entitled adults who refuse to take responsibility for their own limitations. I've been teaching high school English for 8 years now at Washington High, which sits right in the heart of our city's most challenging neighborhood. Every morning I drive 40 minutes from my quiet home to a school where metal detectors greet students at the entrance and police officers patrol the hallways. It's not easy work, but it's important work. These kids need teachers who won't give up on them, and I've never been one to back down from a challenge. The pay isn't great, which is why my wife and I chose to live in a more affordable suburb rather than closer to my school. Our son attends the local elementary school there, and honestly, the contrast between his school and mine is pretty stark. His school has manicured lawns, brand new playground equipment, and parents who show up to every event in luxury cars. My school has barred windows, outdated textbooks, and parents who work 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. On this particular Tuesday evening, I was rushing from my classroom to make it to parent-teacher conferences at my son's school. I hadn't had time to change clothes, so I was still wearing my usual work uniform, khaki pants, the Washington High polo shirt with our school logo, and my lanyard with my teacher ID badge hanging around my neck. I'd learned early in my career that dressing professionally, but not too formally, helped me connect better with my students. I pulled into the parking lot of Meadowbrook Elementary just before sunset. The lot was packed with BMWs, Mercedes, and the occasional Tesla. I squeezed my 10-year-old Honda between a Range Rover and a Lexus, grabbed my folder of notes about my son's progress, and headed inside. The school's hallways were bustling with other parents, most of them looking like they'd stepped out of a country club magazine. Designer handbags, perfectly styled hair, and conversations about vacation homes and private tutoring filled the air. I kept my head down and tried to navigate toward my son's classroom, checking the room numbers when I went. I was studying the classroom directory posted on the wall when I heard it, that unmistakable sound of someone clearing their throat to get attention. I turned around to see a woman who looked like she'd been assembled from a suburban mom starter pack. She had blonde highlights, athletic wear that probably cost more than I spend on groceries in a month, and a massive purse that could have housed a small family. She said, "Excuse me," in that voice that made my teeth itch, the kind of artificially sweet tone that barely concealed irritation. I simply said yes back to her. My response wasn't exactly warm. It had been a long day dealing with budget cuts, broken air conditioning, and a fight in the cafeteria that took 3 security guards to break up. I was tired, and something about her attitude already had me on edge. She asked me where Miss Smith's room was. She said it like she was talking to hired help, with that expectant look that said she assumed I would drop everything to assist her. I told her I had no idea where it was. She responded by saying that I worked here, so how could I not know? The assumption hit me like a slap. Just because I was wearing a school polo and had an ID badge, she'd decided I was staff at her precious suburban school. The condescension in her voice made it clear what she thought of school employees. I explained that I didn't work here and didn't know where Miss Smith's room was. She told me I was being rude and that she was going to speak to the principal about my attitude. That's when something clicked in my brain. This woman had made an assumption, insulted me, and was now threatening to get me in trouble for a job I didn't even have. But technically, I did work at a school, just not this one. I pulled out a pen and a piece of paper from my folder, old habits from years of taking notes during parent meetings and jotting down thoughts about lesson plans. I told her she was absolutely right and that I'd give her my information. I wrote down my full name, then room 435, and my phone extension from Washington High. I handed her the paper and told her to please go right now and tell the principal that I had no time and even less patience to deal with her or anybody like her. I said it with a smile that probably looked a little too satisfied. Her eyes widened when she read it, clearly confused by the room number since Meadowbrook Elementary was obviously a single-story building. She asked about room 435, saying this school didn't have a room 435. I confirmed that, no, it didn't. I walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing there with my information clutched in her hand. I found my son's classroom and had a perfectly pleasant conference with his teacher, discussing his progress in math and his love for reading. The whole time, though, I kept wondering if Karen would actually follow through on her threat. I got my answer when I was leaving the building. The principal, a friendly guy named Mr. Rodriguez, was standing by the main entrance, saying goodbye to parents when they left for the evening. When I approached, I could see him trying not to laugh. He told me I was killing him, shaking his head with amusement. I replied that with the big bucks comes the big headaches. He shook his head, grinning despite himself, and explained what had happened. He said she had come storming into his office 20 minutes ago, waving a piece of paper and demanding he fire me immediately. She had called me the rudest employee she'd ever encountered and said my attitude was completely unprofessional. I asked him what happened next. He told me he had to explain that room 435 didn't exist in their building, and that Washington High was about 40 minutes away in the opposite direction. Then he had to explain that just because someone wears a school polo doesn't mean they work at every school in the district. I asked how she took that news. He said she left very quickly and very quietly, though he thought she was more embarrassed than apologetic. Tomorrow I'd be back at Washington High dealing with real problems like underfunded programs and kids who were fighting just to survive. But tonight I'd reminded myself why I chose to work with people who might not have much money but at least treat others with basic human dignity. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.